Hey, welcome back to the Thatcher Report. I'm doing this a little bit freehand without having first written a coherent Substack. I have a couple of drafts going, but I just felt like I had more to say and maybe kind of crunched for time being a dad. So I thought I'd try this. So, one of the things that's happening right now, which is pretty emotional and painful, is that my new political outlook is conflicting with people I really care about and love, family members, very close friends, community members. It's kind of a long list, and that's a bummer to have such fundamental disagreements with people who I fundamentally love and love me. And it's much nicer to be in accord. Now, I found other people that really nod and agree that they think they're looking at things a way that makes sense to me. And I've obviously found lots of publications that agree with me that there are some really major problems on the left and within the even mainstream Democratic Party, and they're articulating them. This is like the rise of the independent press, the whole Substack phenomena, which the free press is written on the Substack platform. So, in many ways, perhaps Substack, if the medium is the message, maybe Substack newsletters versus news publications. The newsletters are fundamentally independent and by definition, but really they have a different outlook than you're going to get from like the New York Times or CNN or something, MSNBC or MS Now, whatever they call it, and NPR. And so it's not like I don't have allies, but I don't, allies kind of means that you have enemies, and I don't want to have any enemies. And that's something I'm trying to navigate as I have exploring what I think is like the scales have fallen from my eyes when it comes to the Democratic Party and the news organizations that I was raised listening to, really believing in. And then, of course, there's a wider academic and cultural discourse. I went to a really left wing university with no grades, super alternative. Angela Davis was one of my professors. I used to debate Zionism with her. It was all super civil and positive in a way. But that culture has continued in a certain pathway. I was in college in the early 90s, and now, 20 years later, 30 years later, excuse me, it's that little path, that little bit of difference that I was experiencing back then, where like, why am I defending Jewish land back when the people talk about like Navajo land back, but why can't Jews have that conversation too? Now, 30 years later, that like the one little degree of difference or a few degrees of difference back then is now a very, 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 very far distance. If you think of two ships slightly diverging. And I'm finding it really tough to navigate some of the emotional issues, emotional valences, but I'm also not going to go back. I can't look at what's happened in mainstream left wing culture and more far. What they say is what the popular media tells me is far left, like progressive politics. I'm referring to. I don't know that they're so far left. They seem pretty front and center for me in New York. We have the Congress people, the mayors, the various political candidates, and certainly the political the discourse on the street level, like with trans, let's say trans children or something like that. That's like happening all around me all the time. That's the mainstream discourse that I'm participating in. Now, if I was living in Oklahoma City, or I don't know, Orange County or something, maybe it would be a little bit different. I'm not sure, but this is I can only the podcast, the Substack is called Thatcher Report. I can only report what I'm seeing. So um, I'm seeing some really big problems, and I'm feel like I'm accurate in diagnosing or observing those problems, but unfortunately that causes kind of a rupture. So let me start with something positive, and then we'll get to the rupture stuff. So what's positive is that This was one of these I told you so moments, kind of fun to say for me, but probably annoying to listen to. I've been talking about affordability as a key issue in my various publications for, I don't know, a year now or something like that. And I've been feeling it in my bones for much, much, much longer. I grew up what you would call middle class. In a suburb that my parents could afford to buy into when they were really young. They were like 30. They had a little bit of what you would call, quote unquote, inherited wealth. My one set of grandparents loaned my dad uh, a little a sum of money that helped him get a down payment on a modest house that my mother still lives in 50 years later, literally. And the suburb has become very elite in those 50 years, but it didn't start that way. So, and I'm a public school kid. So yeah, that it was suburban, it was sheltered, but it kind of increasingly became out of reach for people. It wasn't out of reach for my parents grew up not like that. They grew up either in poverty or maybe lower middle class. I don't know what you say it, immigrants. It's a mixed bag. But the point is that I don't come from money. And I have various privileges and benefits like all humans do compared to other humans who have it worse. But I didn't don't have a safety net or anything like that. So I have a particular perspective on affordability because I've been negotiating it for a really long time. And working, that's been my response is to work and to sacrifice maybe some dreams, artistic dreams, in order to make money because I got to eat. And those have been really good decisions for me financially, and they've been really hard decisions for me when it comes to like your inner dreams or anything. And that's part of adulthood, that's growing up, but I've certainly felt them acutely. Anyways, my observation is that affordability is something I've been talking about. It's something I kind of missed with the Biden years because I was doing pretty well, and the inflation for groceries wasn't really catching up to me. And I was also able to buy a property at a COVID discount, essentially, when money was cheap. And I happened to find a property that was kind of a little bit in a more obscure neighborhood. That was a really good deal. And I just went for it. So I kind of missed it during Biden. I kind of sensed that the Kamala Harris's ideas for housing, making housing more affordable by giving like a $25,000 tax write-off or something, it was kind of ridiculous. And then I realized with the rise of Trump, with the reissue of Trump, that really affordability was far more real than I had paid attention to, and I felt my own financial insecurity. So it hits home. So here's the thing about affordability, the good news about it all, and I'm still reflecting on the election results in this odd year election, which were really pretty dramatic for the Democratic Party, but this was only impacting a few states because that's all we got to test. So maybe if we had more states had odd year elections, we would have even seen a bigger response for the Democrats. I think that's a reasonable conclusion. Democrats across the board, maybe mostly mainstream because those are the ones that were running, but also obviously in New York with a super far left progressive Zohran Mamdani and his victory and sort of capturing the national conversation. So that's what I mean by across the board. Although the mayor in Minneapolis didn't turn out to be super far left progressive, actually like a Jewish centrist one. Kind of interesting to see maybe the rise of Jewish centrists in the party. I don't know. I'm guessing that's kind of a fluke. But Trump's voters, the point is that Trump's voters were talking about affordability. You hear all types of things on the left or the center left or whatever you want to call the other side of the aisle that's not Republican about racism and fascism and end of democracy. You hear all this kind of obfuscatory terminology, but the reality is people were voting, I think, based on my reading and my conversations with people anecdotally, is that people were really worried about affordability, and the sort of centrist status quo is, oh, I'm a California Democrat and I'm a multimillionaire, so let's just noodle around the edges and then everything's going to be okay. People weren't really buying that, and then Trump won. So now with the latest election results, we saw that certainly Zohran Mamdani talked about affordability. I mean, there's a lot written about his youth and his charisma and his skill at TikTok and so forth, but his messaging was really on point. It was just affordability, affordability, affordability. Obviously, Jewish people like myself get very distracted or very focused on the Israel issue because we see that as a hinge for other areas of discrimination by the left and racism and bigotry that the left says is not racism or bigotry, but I think it's pretty clear that they're not immune to that. But really, he talked about affordability. And as an aside, what I really loved was walking around some of the extremely wealthy neighborhoods in Brooklyn, which is like being in Beverly Hills or Bel Air or, you know, I don't know, some super fancy parts of San Francisco, Silicon Valley. You would see these like literally $5, $6, $7 million brownstones, these beautiful houses in Park Slope, and they would have a Zohran Mamdani like lawn sign in their little front gardens saying affordability, which I always thought was so funny. Like, why don't they just give away their house if they really believe that and live a more modest life? But in any event, affordability captured certainly the zeitgeist of the far left. It has for a long time. This is what Bernie Sanders has been talking about. This is why Bernie Sanders voters have gone to Trump, a certain percentage of them. And it's because, as my dad always taught me, respect the voters. Don't tell them they're racist. Don't tell them they're dumb. Don't tell them they're believing in fascism. Listen to what they're doing. Listen, observe what they're doing and respond to that. And guess what? That's how democracy works. You don't tell people what to think. You listen to what they're thinking and hopefully you respond. So the Republican Party now talks about affordability, which is a completely change from the Bush dynasty. That's the Make America Great Again revolution, right? That's the branding. That's the messaging. We say MAGA, it sounds kind of scary. Maybe parts of it are scary and parts of it are authoritarian and not what I would do if I were in power. Thinking like kind of the ICE raids and some of that's just the unnecessary vitriol and bombast, which is really alienating to people when ideally government should be unifying. But MAGA's been talking, make America great again, make America healthy again. These are all really positive things. Like we should want greatness. We should want affordability. The progressives have been talking about it. Like I said, Bernie Sanders for a long time now. Their new standard bearer, Zohran Mamdani, he learned from that. He learned the lesson well. Talk about affordability. Well, now all of a sudden, mainstream Democrats are now talking about it. That's what I think is different from the election a few weeks ago. The mainstream Democrats were sort of piecemeal. They were talking about identity politics. They still are to a certain degree, land acknowledgement, trans, anti-Israel, all this kind of weird identitarian stuff. And they're like, well, don't be a racist, just agree with our ranking of humans. It's kind of the same thing. Some people used to call it reverse racism back once upon a time, but whatever it is, it's discriminatory and not the way I think you should think about human beings. I don't think you should look at their genetics. I think you should look at behaviors and dignity. But in any event, the mainstream were kind of all over the place. Kamala Harris was sort of a fuzzy messenger. Biden talked about working class issues, but he didn't deliver. He delivered massive legislation, really crazy legislation. But that legislation, as manifest by the Democratic Party, didn't build stuff, didn't do the things it said it was going to do. And then, of course, there's the Affordable Care Act, which is, like George Orwell wrote that. Like, what's affordable about it? I've been on it ever since it was created. I've been on Obamacare as a small business owner, or around not long after it was created. I've been on it. 15 years I've been on it, and it's not affordable. So, and is it caring? I don't know. It was an act. It got the third word correctly, but the first two, not so much. So, and you're not even allowed to say that as a Democrat. That's also a forbidden topic. So, but now that the center Democrats, the mainstream Democrats, who had a good showing, the debate is still on in the Democratic Party, which way it's going to go. It's multi-faction. It's always been like that in the Democrats. They're different than the Republicans. Now they're talking about affordability. So what's the good news in all of this? Well, you got the Republican Party talking about affordability, which is just amazing that happened, but it's happening. You had the progressives talking about affordability. Well, you can kind of rely on them to do that. Now, finally, another irony of politics is now finally the supposed middle-class labor New Deal Democrats, now they're talking about affordability. They're retreating maybe from the ivory tower and the elite precincts of coastal America, Martha's Vineyard, Beverly Hills, whatever, Malibu, and they're now talking about affordability. Well, that's great for the American people. Because that's the conversation we need to have. Obviously, public safety is a big one. That's always number one. Can I walk out my door and not get killed and not get harmed? That's a very valid issue in New York City for Jewish people. It's obviously a valid issue for many, many people of all different backgrounds. But then after that, it's, can I afford my life? And the answer is no, you really can't if you want a middle class life. If you're not born into it, you're out. You're out of luck. So now that everybody's talking about affordability for the moment, until we get some new distraction that people use to claw their way to power, I think this creates an opportunity for a different type of political leader that could be unifying. I don't think it's going to be Trump. He's not a unifier. He's not interested in that. I don't know enough about the Republican field to say, is Marco Rubio more of a unifier, or J.D. Vance or somebody, since Trump is never going to run again? I don't know. I'm sure they're out there. I've certainly listened to the House Majority Whip, can't remember his name, Republican, really intellectual guy from Minnesota, and seems like he could have a lot of appeal, or his kind of politics are just more intellectual, policy driven, less kind of social media scoring points. But and I'm certainly not seeing it at all in the Democratic Party. Zero. They're hyper-partisan at all sides. The progressives, obviously, by definition, are very partisan. They're at battle with the whole world except for themselves. And the mainstream Dems are no kings. They're, Trump is a fascist. Democracy is ending tomorrow or yesterday or in a week from now. It's a little unclear. But you're allowed to say democracy is ending. So if democracy was ending, you wouldn't be allowed to say that, right? Because we'd be living in a totalitarian state like all of the Arab world, where you can't say stuff. There's no free speech. But as an example that the left loves to valorize, but you can say it now. So I'm not sure that passes the smell test. But in any event, the Democratic Party, I don't see them unifying at all. Zero. Like, they're just so uninterested in that because, and we'll get into some of those reasons in a bit. I think Trump is a really interesting example of how a celebrity can become politically powerful. He had zero political background, zero. I mean, culturally, sure, there was cultural politics, all the birther nonsense, all the conspiracy stuff was kind of political, but he didn't have elected office at all and became president. And obviously, it was kind of a fluke the first time, winning the Electoral College, losing the popular vote, but not the third time. That's no fluke. And so he's not really going to, I don't think he's really going to do it. The progressives aren't going to do it. The Democrats are going to do it. But but the point about Trump is that he was a celebrity and he became a political figure. Zoran Mamdani is also kind of an example. He turned himself into a celebrity. And yes, of course, he started in politics. He's never really worked a job. He comes from a very elite, wealthy family. He doesn't have to work. He was assemblyman, so that's a real thing. He's a politician, but he's way bigger than that because of his celebrity, and also not unifying. I think there's an opportunity for some kind of celebrity. I don't know enough about pop culture. If it's a movie star, probably not George Clooney, but if it's like a Tom Cruise kind of character, if it's a Taylor Swift kind of character from the music world, who can kind of come in and say, like, look, the issue is affordability and everybody needs to care about that. I think that could be really, really interesting to see if something like that emerges over the next couple of years. I don't know where it's going to come from. Is it going to come from the center left? Is it just going to come out of nowhere? Trump came out of nowhere. I'm not a pop culture person. I don't watch pre-streaming. I don't watch, broadcast television, never watched The Apprentice. I was not really aware of him as a celebrity. Wasn't that, if you don't watch reality television, he didn't have a big impact. So maybe this person is waiting on the sidelines, and he or she will come out. And I think that's really exciting to think about. I don't believe it'll be a third party candidate. That never works. They're spoilers at best, but just hold that thought for a little bit. If affordability is now the national conversation, because finally mainstream Democrats realized, like 20 years too late, that this is an important thing and not everybody goes to elite liberal arts colleges and has a great life and has property and everything at a relatively young age. If now they've come around, okay, good. I'm glad they did. It's never too late, right? To pay attention. There's lots of things in my life that I've been super late in realizing, and I'm sure I'm still have opportunity for improvement forever. This is neat. So maybe there's going to be some kind of not third party, but like third person, right? A nonpartisan person that can be a unifier and kind of heal some of the wounds. Certainly MAGA is very wounding. It's very vitriolic. It's very us or them. Although interestingly, Trump was able to expand his base, but he's not going to run again. So we're not going to, I don't think we're going to see that again. I think we're going to kind of devolve again into more of the partisanship. Certainly if you look at the Democrats, they're just hyper partisan. Everything is, Trump derangement syndrome, never Trump, whatever you want to call it. They don't even really like acknowledge he's president or like democratically. I mean, they know he is, but they don't have any way of really talking to those voters. John Fetterman does, but he's a complete outlier. That Gavin Newsom, I don't think is going to get red state people to vote for him because he's so partisan. So that's an exciting thing. Now, going back to the painful stuff. So it's caused consternation in my kind of immediate world, and it's also caused some thumbs up and positivity that I've just don't consider. I mean, I'm technically a Democrat. I'm a member of the party because I have to be in New York City in closed primaries, but I'm really super critical of the party, and I just don't know that that's ever going to end. I think I should be super critical of the Republican Party too, but I didn't grow up in it. I don't have an opportunity to vote for Republicans very rarely. I mean, almost maybe once every 4 years for president or something. Maybe senatorial campaigns every 6 years, maybe upcoming in the gubernatorial race. I mean, there's a few races that are politically competitive, but almost none. It's like 95% of the politics I am involved in as a citizen of this country are not competitive. It's all the Democratic Party competing within itself. There's a machine. There's always a machine. I'm sure the RNC has it too. So I don't really get much say in anything, and I'm just kind of captive to the Democratic Party. So I'm going to focus on criticizing power where power lies, and where I experience power as a voter from Massachusetts, lived in California, now in New York, briefly in Washington, D.C., I got to react to the politics. So that hopefully some people will understand why I focus my ire and criticism on the Democrats, because that's the only game in town where I live in Brooklyn, New York. Why will the scales have fallen from my eyes? I think the party is profoundly on the wrong track and essentially hopeless. And I honestly would be very happy for it to go away and be completely rebuilt. And I don't think that's going to happen unless there's some real upset in the midterms and they get wiped out, which nobody at this point with few brain cells is predicting that. It's probably going to be what people have been saying for a long time, which is that the Democrats are probably going to squeeze out a win in Congress by a couple of seats because there's just not that many competitive races anymore. They won't take the Senate, and we'll have, maybe some theatrical impeachments again or something, and it'll just be the Democrats will still be in the game. But why? What's the problem? What's the problem here, for me at least? And what I'm going to notice is that, people on the left, it's so easy to see it now if you pull yourself out of it. They're so partisan. Everything is seen within a partisan lens. And what makes it complicated is that the left, generally speaking, that I include moderates and centrists in that calculus, they control the establishment media. The media changes over time. I wasn't really such an astute reader of the New York Times as a teenager as I am now. But it's changes. There's different publishers. They're all from the same family, but there's different publishers. There's different editors. Journalists come and go. Vibes kind of change. But I think like the great wokeification that we saw with, Me Too, and I guess it's like maybe the 2010s, and Obama was sort of a sign for some of that. And all the universities and all the censorship, which I think is alive and well on the left. I don't think they're not going away from cancel culture. They're going deeper into it. That wokeification has really changed on the street level, right? That's Trump. In many ways, that's his success, even in places like New York City that are much more Republican leaning, or they're certainly pro-Trump leaning than they ever were. But the New York Times and a lot of the establishment media is still super woke. They still look at things through an identity lens, and it's super, super partisan. I mean, I can't really distinguish a lot of the journalism that I consume, it's also the Atlantic or the New Yorker, from the Democratic Party. It really feels like a communications arm from the party. And maybe it's always been like that. The history of the newspapers, a lot of them started with political parties, but it just seems more now than it used to be. And if you start reading independent sources, you really can see the difference. Like if you read the Wall Street Journal every single day versus the New York Times, it's stark. And this is the opinion page, just the coverage. The differences are dramatic. And then you add the free press and the podcasts, or Mark Halperin, Megyn Kelly, and all that stuff. But then it's even more stark. But in any event, the left wing also includes the media, the establishment media, even including Hollywood, even including public school pedagogy, and certainly liberal arts pedagogy. And so it creates this hyper-partisan viewpoint that's really hard to break through, because you're literally taught it from an early age, and it's reinforced constantly. So it's kind of easy to critique the MAGA stuff because they control some narratives, but not really all of them. So you can kind of pick and choose, like, okay, some tariffs probably are good and some are probably injurious, and the ICE raids are kind of sort of easy to sort of say that's kind of dramatic and problematic and maybe illegal and certainly offensive, but having borders is good if you want to have a sovereign nation. So, but on the Democratic side, they can't really see that about themselves because they control all these narratives. So if you read the New York Times, which I glance at it every day, if you read that, if you live in a blue area, it's really, they call it the blue bubble, but it's not. It's more than a bubble. It's like a massive multivalent factor in your lives. It's really quite strong. My problem is that if you see through it, if you get a chance to see through it, you can't really go back into it because it's so problematic. And I'm just going to rattle off a couple of proof points of why I think it's problematic, and why you shouldn't really believe in the Democratic Party line, and in the mainstream establishment press party line, which are the same. And just look at income inequality. It's the worst in blue states. I live in New York, California. Now, these states are very powerful. Obviously, in places where there's great wealth, obviously there's going to be great income inequality. You have a few billionaires that throws off the whole thing. But it's so intense; it's just killing the middle class in coastal America and in other blue states. Why is that? How come there's no introspection in the Democratic Party or in their establishment media arms that interrogates this? Now, of course, there is an exception with the abundance debate, or the abundance theories as articulated by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, but that's really inside baseball. That has not triggered a national conversation. It just hasn't. Nobody thinks about these guys, I think, outside of very, very small precincts in the media. And are they smart? Yeah. Do I find them extremely smug and self-congratulatory? Yeah, but that's like a vibes thing. They could say the same thing about JD Vance or Trump or something. So that's fine. There's lots of personality defects all around, or just not my flavor of being in the public eye. But nevertheless, abundance is an exception. The Democratic Party is not really embracing this. And we just had massive fires in LA, and it's a great opportunity to rebuild. A tragedy and a horrible event and loss of life, but a great opportunity to rebuild. What's the response? It's a supermajority. The Democrats are a supermajority in California. Are you telling me they can't pass legislation to make it easier to build? Now, there's some tinkerings around that, but it's not really making a difference, right? It's not like all of a sudden people are moving to LA versus, I don't know, some other place, North Carolina, and then enjoying the fruits of democratic policy. So there's income inequality. There's all the there's like, to me, there's a really lack of credibility. I'm told that it's morally right to be a Democrat and it's morally wrong to be a Republican. but then I'm seeing like, well, what about all the income problems, the affordability problems? I don't see a solution. Certainly coming from the progressives, I don't see a solution. I don't think more taxing and more regulation is going to solve our problems. It just doesn't seem logical. We've been doing that my entire life. I've lived in a blue regime, and that's super high tax, super high regulations. I don't see them being very effective in combating income inequality. So I'm open to other ideas. The abundance ideas, I think, seem like Republican ideas from 20 years ago. So, okay, let's try those. But you could just kind of vote Republican. And, we'll see. In New York, we're going to have a competitive gubernatorial race, it looks like, and next year. And so maybe that'll yield some different policies if a Republican wins. I'm not sure it'll make much of a difference based on our legislature, but here's for hoping for trying. Other Democratic problems, COVID. I don't think I'm going to heal now that it has nothing. I was going to say now that I'm a dad, but it has nothing to do with my paternity. COVID in blue states, they shut down the schools for 2 years. Okay, I'm just going to move on from there. I mean, that is okay. I can't move on because I do get emotional. That to me is criminal. That's a criminal act. That was criminal to children, criminal to their families. Masking children is bonkers. I'm not really big on health stuff. I have a really good friend who's super knowledgeable and super passionate about this. I'm not going to wade into the vaccine uh, discussion because I was vaccinated. I don't have any problems with it. But the closing of the public schools because of the teachers union, that was terrible. I see zero introspection from the Democratic Party about that. In Judaism, we call it tshuva. Christians call it repentance or confession. I don't see any confession or repentance or tshuva, the Jewish idea of repentance. I don't see that happening in the Democratic Party about COVID. They just want to move on. I see masking at some of the progressive gatherings that they have, which I think is hilarious. But I don't see them changing. So COVID, why would I trust a Democratic Party when another bad thing is going to happen? Bad things happen. I've lived in New York through 9/11, Hurricane Sandy. I was in Israel for the Second Intifada a couple of times. That was horrific. We've all lived through COVID. I'm sure there's other catastrophes I can't think about at the moment, and they're going to come. That's life. That's 2008, the Great Recession. I don't see like democratic answers for these big problems. I really don't. I'd like to see it because I'm captured by their party, and I would like to believe that some of the good things in the Democratic Party, like dignity for people, although unfortunately they rank people by their genetics, but that idea of dignity is a nice one. I Outside of that and kind of vaguely caring about poor people or something, I'm not really seeing. And the environment, that's good. I want the environment to be. I don't want to have polluted water or air, but or soil. But I'm not really seeing them tackle some of these issues. Of course, there's Israel. I've talked about that a lot. It's just sort of demonizing Jewish land back, but Navajos or Pakistanis, which is not even an ethnicity, Pakistan is an acronym for the different ethnic groups in that newly formed country to be an Islamic country versus India, which is which is obviously majority Hindu and maybe debatably becoming a Hindu governance. But it's just weird. It's just weird their focus on Israel and Jews. It's just like, yeah, there's a lot of chatter in the very far right, which is truly very far right and fringe and growing because of social media about their kind of old school anti-Semitism, like Nazi era anti-Semitism or gentlemen's white waspy anti-Semitism, and that's super troubling. And there's a lot of introspection about that in the Republican Party. You just read the Wall Street Journal, Karl Rove. So many people on the right are critical of this, and they have a public platform. I don't see any of that introspection in the Democratic Party about the anti-Semitism within their ranks. I don't see it. I don't see it. I read the columns in the New York Times from Jewish people often, and they say, no, it's a free speech issue. The Tentifada, all that wasn't really anti-Semitism. I mean, try telling that to a Jewish person going to class. I mean, give me a break. And I know that was a couple years ago now, and the war is over, thank God, because of Donald Trump and Netanyahu being victorious. But it's all going to come back, right? That's not going away. Like the kafiyas haven't gone away. Look at Zohar Mamdani, right? This is like you have to be anti-Israel. And guess what? Israel is a Hebrew word. Jews speak Hebrew. And we're a tiny, 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 tiny global minority. About 14 million of us, maybe 15 million of us in the entire planet. And the fact that we're singled out by the left constantly is just, to me, that's a problem. I don't think you have to be Jewish to sort of say that's weird. That's just a weird one. So land back for everybody else except for Jews. And then there's the public safety. I'm constantly reading in the establishment press that New York is safer, everything's safer. You know what? I don't know what statistic. This is like the COVID thing. They just have no credibility citing their statistics. None. I lived through all of COVID. It was such a bunch of BS and misinformation coming from the establishment press about who was really vulnerable and who wasn't vulnerable. Obviously, many people were vulnerable. There were a lot of deaths, and they're all unnecessary, right? And of course, the origins of COVID. I don't know. It's above my pay grade, but I was told that it was a conspiracy to say that it was a bioweapon from China. And I think it's pretty clear that it's very highly likely a bioweapon from China. And China, meanwhile, has zero repercussions. And I don't really know, and I don't want to get sucked into conspiratorial thinking, but the fact that I was told that wasn't a fair question to ask, and now it's like, well, yeah, that's probably a good question. It's like while Biden was president, and for most of that discussion, right, Trump was president when it started. But of course, he talked about it, but in a really vitriolic and kind of off-putting way, maybe a racist way against Chinese people, which is, invalidating. Who wants to listen to a criticism if you blame all Chinese people? That's insane. But COVID, they lost credibility. And so now when they talk about public safety, it's like, okay, I just can't believe any of it. Like, what are the statistics? Like, purse snatching is down, but rape is up. Like, that seems like a problem. Or, there are fewer shootings than 2 years ago when there were a lot of shootings. Okay. How about zero shootings? I'd like zero shootings. Or it's so incredibly rare that it's just absolutely shocking when there's a shooting instead of it being like a daily occurrence. And who's doing the crime? Right? That's another thing the left can't talk about. It's generally young Black men. That's doing the violent crime, as far as I know. Listen, I'm not a criminologist. I live in New York. I live in a Black neighborhood. I talked to Black business owners just the other week about crime in the area, and we all know where crime is coming from, right? I live near a neighborhood called East New York, Brownsville. These are super low income, like 100% Black neighborhoods, or vast majority of Black neighborhoods. That's where the crime is. It's not coming from grandmas either or children. It's coming from males. And of a certain age, I don't know what age it starts, age 13, 14, however old you can hold a handgun, up until probably, age 40 or something. That's where the crime is. The Democrats can't talk about it. And that's not where all crime is, but that's where violent crime is located, just as an example. And that's like taboo to talk about. But meanwhile, Navajo land back, and trans people, there are trans children. That's the priority. Okay. So the last thing is that why it's really hard for me to be a believer in the Democratic Party, and therefore it necessitates kicking yourself out of establishment media. You just can't read or watch or listen to establishment media because it's all self-reinforcing of the bubble, and you should be very critical of pedagogy too, is the censorship. You literally can't say, there's no curiosity over why the majority of the country voted for Trump. I mean, okay, are there news articles about it, especially after the election in the New York Times? Yeah, there were. And there's some really interesting analysis about how every single county in America trended Republican, except for a handful of super wealthy white counties. And there was a little bit of analysis, but I'm not seeing that sustained. I'm not seeing sustained curiosity in why people are not Democrats. It's kind of like you're either right and you're a Democrat, like you're either correct and you're a Democrat, or you're just kind of wrong, and it's sort of unfortunate and you should be argued with. So it's just censorship. It's a censorious way of moving through the world. And how come there's never like one proof point? How come there's not a pro-Trump or MAGA or just independent journalist in the New York Times, as an example? Yeah, there's Bret Stephens and there's David French, but they're like never Trumpers. They have voices and they're brave, and they're not that interesting at a certain point, because when we live in a country that's majority yes Trump, when there's zero reflection about that in the establishment media or in the Democratic Party, except for a few exceptions like Fetterman, then it's kind of like censorship in my mind. I mean, it's just like you're not allowed to think that. I should caveat a lot of this because when I talk about Trump, because he's such an avatar for a new way of political thinking, but he's diminishing, right? I don't think he's like his high point was the 2024 election, and it's going to slide from there. And I don't think Trump is going to be in the public discourse as much anymore. I think I mean, he's obviously going to be in every single news story because that helps sell advertisements, and he's uniquely able of dominating media narratives. He just has that gift that I don't think most other politicians have. But this is it. It's over. You know, we've gone over the hump for Trump power, and he's a lame duck, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I think that the conversation is going to be shifting around, and but there's still meaning. Like, I don't think the establishment media is going to be talking about Trump maybe in the same way, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that as the Republican Party remains and as Trump diminishes within it, that's really going to be an interesting shift. There's just not a lot of curiosity about that from the left. And the left is big media, academics, public schools, cultural institutions, Hollywood, and the Democratic Party. And I just don't see any interest there. There's just sort of a vibe of censorship. And that just, it's anti-intellectual. It's really problematic to be in a democracy that's so with so many people who are interested in censorship, or just, saying, oh, it's fascism, it's the end of democracy, it's totalitarianism, so therefore I'm not going to listen and have a discussion. I just don't think it works that way to have a democracy. You really have to be curious. You have to be skeptical of power. Whoever's in power, you should be skeptical of, right? Example, the Trump crypto funneling money to his family. It's just crazy. They're already billionaires. Now they're billionaires many more times over. Same thing what Bloomberg did when he was mayor. His wealth just coincidentally grew tremendously while he had political power, although writ small, and maybe it would have grown anyways. That's what happens with billionaires. They don't tend to lose it, but it is there's plenty of criticism to point to on happening with corruption on the right, but I just don't see self-awareness on the left. I really, really don't. And I'm sure somebody could throw me a few links or something, but I'm just not, like, when I read these publications, which I've stopped reading, like The Atlantic, it's just, or The Bulwark, listening to these podcasts, it's just anti-Trump. It's just partisanship. It's not that interesting. If you think about a sports analogy, I'm a Red Sox fan. I don't know a lot about sports, but I'm a Red Sox fan, not a Yankees fan. If everything is anti-Yankees, you're never going to get a better general manager for the Red Sox. You're just going to be anti-Yankees. And it's just not, you can't run a sports team that way. I don't know how you run a political movement. All right. So that's why I distance myself from the Democratic Party, and why I also think it's interesting to imagine a new type of political figure emerging in the next couple of years who is neither right nor left, but can be a unifier when it comes to the affordability issue. Thank you so much for listening.